Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this important panel discussion. It's my absolute pleasure, and I would try and abide by the 20 minutes rule that has been set by Sidra here. We all know that Pakistan is consistently ranked among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. For our banking sector, shifting away from business as usual is no longer a matter of corporate social responsibility. It is an existential imperative for our financial stability and our economy. So today, we are moving beyond policy debates and will focus more on institutional practice and bankable solutions. And to help us unpack the future of sustainable finance, I'm joined by three leading experts, two of whom you have listened to in detail. I'll very quickly introduce our third panelist, Mr. Bilal Anwar, who is an international climate policy expert, and he has about 25 years of diverse experience in climate change and sustainable development. Mr. Bilal is the former CEO of Pakistan's National Disaster Risk Management Fund, and he can provide critical insights into climate policy. So moving right along, my first question is for Mr. Kamran. Kamran, many global banks have simply stopped funding carbon-heavy industries. So my question to you is, given Pakistan's economic reliance on sectors like agriculture and manufacturing, how can the local banks finance transition tech? And by that I mean helping dirty industries gradually go green and without facing international penalties or greenwashing accusations.
Great, thank you. Good question. Look, there are three ways to look at this issue. One, as I alluded to, export-driven. Like if you look at emerging economies, especially, let's take this situation in the Gulf right now, right, with Iran. In the short term, everybody's thinking about how do I secure energy resources for the short, medium term. But the smart money and the smart countries are also trying to figure out long-term, how do I avoid dependency on fossil fuel from the Gulf? I can tell you, obviously, China is more than doubling down on renewable energy. India is doubling down, even Mexico, because they have a pinched nerve with respect to cars, right? Automotive industry. So part of that is one driver. Second is, as I mentioned, we started with sustainable finance, which, if you will, think of it as do more good, okay? So not about do no harm, but it's do more good. The transition finance, which is very relevant for this part of the world and all developing countries, is about how do you incentivize incremental improvements for a company that is in a dirty industry and difficult situation. So that's a second thing. Third is, again, as the panels earlier talked about, what is intrinsically specific, strategic for Pakistan? So if you say that agribusiness is the heart of the industry here, then you focus on that and you figure out how to do this in an efficient way so that we are adopting and incentivizing the use of regenerative farming practices and things of that nature. Now, that may be good enough for just the Pakistani market. It will certainly be good enough for the export market, where people are looking for agriculture produce produced without too much chemical use and so on and so forth. So there are a variety of different ways in which you can think about it, and this is why I said pick your spots and pick the spot that is lined up with where Pakistan is today and where you want it to go going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamran. Bilal sir, my question to you is that Pakistan, we all know, is among the most climate vulnerable countries, and yet we contribute very little to the emissions. So how should Pakistani banks think about climate finance versus the mitigation focus that we see, which is very dominant in the West? So your views on that, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I think the answer to this question is very much framed. Some of the earlier discussions early in the morning and even in this session as well. It's absolutely correct that Pakistan have a very little contribution in the making of this massive challenge, global challenge of climate change. But at the same time, Pakistan is at the forefront of facing the brunt of it and the impacts of it. Now, the banks have a very important role to play in it. You know, the banks control the capital in a country, and Pakistan, of course, you know, they have quite a massive and instrumental control as well. And the capital, of course, can be utilized by building the incentives, by changing the behaviors, and not only the changing the behaviors of individuals, but changing the behavior of investors and the investment behaviors as well. Now, I think there's a little bit of a kind of a contextual thing which we need to understand, and Kamran Saab actually built a very good case as well. In case of Pakistan, when we're talking about the climate investments, it's very different from a developed economy perspective. In the developed economy, the entire question and the challenge is how to decarbonize the economy. Whereas in a country like Pakistan, of course, there is a potential and there's a room for decarbonizing because of the industry which is operating on an outdated technology. But at the same time, I think that the challenge is a lot more complex. And especially when it comes to the adaptation finance, which need to be built in and integrated, it becomes even more complex. So what I am actually saying is, yes, decarbonization need to be integrated to the extent possible, but that needed to be done while actually securing the economic growth, industrialization, urbanization, and several other things. Well, Pakistan certainly have some sectors where there is a need for investments. And the banking sector basically have to look and have to focus and prioritize those investments. I'm talking about the agri sector, urbanization, water, mobility, and number of other areas as well. But then the investment need to be built, need to be designed in a climate sensitive manner. Not only by just ticking the few boxes, but in a truly and meaningfully climate sensitive manner. And that actually required quite a lot of work. A significant amount of work is already has been actually completed. There's a green taxonomy, which is right now there, and it is quite a remarkable document which can be actually incorporated. There are other initiatives which actually on a technological front which can actually support the banking sector in terms of understanding and evaluating the climate risks. And that's all what the banking sector need to do, is to understand and to integrate the climate risk. And that climate risk need to be converted into the resilience. And that is only possible through the investment into those areas which are critical for the economic growth and the social growth of Pakistan. So the banking sector have a huge role to play. They need to integrate the risk. They need to price the risk as well. And then they need to discount any resilience efforts and initiatives which the industry or any other entity have actually undertaken. So I think this is how it can be done, and a number of areas, a lot of work is still needed to be done, but banking sector is becoming a lot more cognizant of that, and I hope the capital is started to flow towards these directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. Hock, how can the credit enhancement mechanisms specifically unlock private capital for climate resilient and green infrastructure in a market like Pakistan?
Thank you. Just to set the stage, the credit enhancement mechanism actually is a catalyst for change. Yep. It does not finance everything. It does not replace funding to the right sectors.
True.
But when people are unfamiliar or they view things as risky, the credit enhancement provider, the guarantor, find a way. So I've heard a lot of times, oh, this is unbankable, this is too risky. And the conversation ends. It is our job to find a way. And then from then on, we find solutions for the sector. So I urge everyone to look at what the guarantors are doing and then hope to replicate. The CEOs of the banks here should be asking, if InfraZamin can take this exposure, why can't we?
Yeah.
Right? So that's the role guarantors have.
Okay.
And the guardrails we put on should be replicated across the sector. So when you have something unbankable, a few who sign up to the guardrails will set the standard, and everybody else who are not willing to follow the standards don't get the funds. So over time, if you want a nice neighborhood, you know, a few freshly painted houses,
Yeah.
we'll then see everybody painting their houses, and then you have the whole neighborhood becoming better. So it starts with a few people who signed up to the standards, and then making everybody follow.
Thank you. I'll come back to Kamran again. Kamran, in your opinion, what concrete steps must Pakistani banks take so that they get access to international funding and commercial financing for sustainable projects?
Great. Look, everything has a build-out period. So as private sector leaders, we have a responsibility to think about where we need to be X years from now, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. This is part of that same business exercise. If I am a Pakistani bank, where do I need to be 5 years from now? What would be expected of me from regulators? What would be expected of me from my clients? What would I need in terms of my own capital raising needs? If you start with that and you, like I was saying, figure out why you want to do this. So it's why do I want to do it? What constitutes sustainability in my business model? And then the last bit is, how do I do it? i.e., how do I prove to the world that I've done it? That's reporting and all of that, right? So I think for Pakistani banks, they have to start small to think about which are my clients who actually have this need. Which sector are they in? Can I start to build something here just to address them? And then go from there. You can then add more, replicate the model to other sectors and so on. The second thing that, you know, we talked a little bit about credit guarantees, but there's also a whole issue of blended finance,
Yeah.
which Pakistan needs plenty of because the ability to borrow commercial capital is limited. So you have to find ways to attract this philanthropic, foundational, or G7 grant type of capital into Pakistan. And for that, you need to have a business model in place for how to utilize. So just to give you an example, just last week, I was in Tajikistan for the board meeting of the UN Green Climate Fund, which is the largest climate fund in the world, mostly funded by G7. And I know Hock has a whole company funded through a GCF allocation as well. We launched a private equity fund for Vietnam and Laos for regenerative agriculture, for which we have managed to get 50 million from GCF to come to this fund for these countries, which will then allow them the branding and positioning to raise the additional 150 million to then have a $200 million fund for small micro enterprises in the agribusiness sector who are then incentivized to work with farmers who are adopting the right practices. So you have to think very strategically, one idea, one intervention at a time, I think it'd be easy for me to just give some blanket policy advice, which means nothing. So I think it has to start small, and it has, again, I emphasize it, it has to make sense for the bank, and it has to make sense for the bank's clients.
Thank you. Hock, my next question to you is, how can Pakistan develop a robust, local, sustainable bond market? And what role can international guarantee providers play in upgrading the credit ratings of the local sustainable bond issuers and to attract international ESG funds?
Yeah, the bond market requires an ecosystem, right? From the rating agencies to regulators. But at the core of it is the development of an investor base. Borrowers are there, but you need investors who would be very, very hungry for these longer dated bonds. And bonds beat banks when it's 10 to 15 years. In Malaysia's case, we can do a 27-year corporate bond. 27 years. So the development of that is a holistic approach at all the stakeholders driving towards that outcome, right? And it boils down to whether you want tax benefits, you want to encourage the deregulation of certain investors. That's all geared towards developing that, right? And the guarantor's role, I think at the Development Guarantee Group, we manage the Green Guarantee Company. And we like to deploy our guarantee to good projects in lowly rated countries. So it is very unfortunate in a lot of world, a lot of countries in the world, that countries are not highly rated. And there's a podcast on the Development Guarantee Group where I interviewed Lisa Sachs. And Lisa Sachs is Jeffrey Sachs' daughter. And they had written a paper on credit ratings, sovereign credit ratings, that restrict development of developing countries. You can listen to that. So in the meantime, we can't change the ratings. We can put on a guarantee to lift that.
Thank you. My final question to the panel members, and maybe we can start with Bilal first. Now, looking at the next 3 to 5 years, what one realistic, concrete change would signal that Pakistan's banking sector has genuinely turned climate responsive?
Yeah, well, I mean, being a ruthlessly, brutally climate change person, I mean, what I would like to see in the next 3 to 5 years or whatever time period is, the banking sector actually becoming a lot more knowledgeable about assessing the risk, the climate risks, and then integrated those climate risks into their transactions, into their banking transactions. I mean, what happens today right now is anyone actually who walks into the bank and asking for a credit and a loan for any kind of investment, they are being treated very equally and uniformly, and without actually going into too much of a detail that where the investment is going to land and what kind of risk exposures the investment is going to be facing. I mean, the one primary reason behind was that there was no capacity or the capabilities available in the country. But I think this gap has been actually addressed to some extent. When I was the CEO of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund, we have actually established this, the so-called NatCat, Natural Catastrophic Model. And that model actually can evaluate the risks, and that service is available to the banks. So I think it comes to the bottom line of, the climate risk, like any other risk, should have a price. And any resilience efforts should also bearing some kind of a discount for the investors. And that need to be integrated into the banking sectors. And I think this is, when it happens, or it started to be happening, I think then we can actually rest assured that the banks have actually become climate risk sensitive in their operations.
Thank you, Bilal. Kamran, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, look, keeping with the theme of the morning sessions, it may sound not intuitive, but some of the unfinished business in Pakistan is actually an opportunity, particularly on social and environmental issues. There is capital out there looking for impactful opportunities where the allocators can say, I did this and it produced this impact. So we in Pakistan have to start thinking about, we talked about women in the workforce. 50% of the population of Pakistan is women. Only 25% of them work. Of the 50% that are men, only 80% of them work. If you do the math, you come quickly to a conclusion that less than 55% of people in Pakistan are actually employed in economic activity. How are you going to compete with countries that are operating at 80%, right? So you can create that narrative. Anybody who's looking for impact on empowerment of women, for example, can see it. You can see that in the environment as well. So then the question becomes, how would we know, which was your... I think it'll be about benchmark. So the capital is there. We need to give credible entities or platforms where people can see that it can be executed properly in Pakistan. If you do that, the first benchmark would be, I would say, the Treasury. The Pakistan Treasury, what is the delta between a normal bond and a green bond of Pakistan, right? So what is that so-called premium? Once you set that benchmark, it then allows corporates to kind of piggyback on a similar kind of structure. So in 3 to 5 years, if we can come up with some credible vehicles which can attract capital and then demonstrate that investments can create impact, I think it will have a very, very powerful impact on Pakistan Treasury's ability to raise money, and then for a lot of the corporates, including banks, to go out and raise money. But it requires homework, it requires commitment. One thing I forgot to say in my speech is that our senior management, our management board, their remuneration is not insignificantly directly tied to how we do in sustainability. So it doesn't come from nothing. I mean, they lose money if we start to change our strategy, and it's a very public statement. So I think the commitment has to be pretty firm, and it needs to be related to growth. I'm sorry to say that. Everything has to be about growth. It cannot be, I think we talked about earlier, we can't go back to looking at things that make sense in the vulture culture. We have to think about the Shaheen culture.
Okay, thank you. Hock, any final words on this?
I'd rather not focus on 3 to 5 years, but tomorrow. And if I can leave 2 tools for the decision-making parties here, whether they are bank CEO, management, or credit committee, or board members. One I learned from my boss, Kiyoshi Nishimura. He said, Hock, how can you expect a different outcome tomorrow if you're going to do what you do today? If you're doing everything the same today and expect a different outcome, that is not going to happen. So hopefully when you go back to your offices, the change in perspective to do things differently will now allow you to achieve a different outcome. The second one was when we, in Manila, I supported a microfinance non-profit bond. A team member came to me, Hock, can a non-profit microfinance institution serving 3 million women entrepreneurs in the Philippines issue bonds, right? We were chasing far larger deals and all that, but instead of saying no, if I had done so, it would have been on the basis that I didn't know anything about microfinance. So try not to say no when you don't know. Instead, I offer you why not. So why not is not a yes, but it's an invitation to understand and learn and get to the weeds of the issue or the problem. If you do these 2 things tomorrow, I think 3 to 5 years we'll have a different outcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Bilal. Thank you very much, Kamran. And thank you, Hock.